Okay, here is our interview with Dr. Jeste. I always prepared notes for my interviews, and usually they're about a half page. But I want to show you that here I've got 2.5 pages of notes.
Wow. Thank you.
So I was definitely fascinated by your new book and what you're studying.
Thank you.
So I just want to basically cover the basics of what is wisdom, and then give us some examples. We could talk about some people from the past and talk about some people presently that we think are wisest people, and then what each of us can do to try to achieve more wisdom. I'm actually going to become a father for the first time in my life in 4 weeks.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And I'm definitely going to want to hear from you what I should be doing with my child to give them the best opportunity to grow up to be a wise person. So let's start with the definition of wisdom, and you tell me if I'm wrong here, because I took this from your book. It seemed to me you had come up with kind of 5 attributes of a wise person, which the first one was pro-social attitudes and behaviors. The next one was emotional stability and happiness. Am I correct that this is what essentially what you consider the definition?
Exactly.
Okay, so take us through each one of those so people know what you have in mind when you talk about wisdom. And I know you didn't just pull this out of your own head. This was after much study you came up with this, but kind of let's tick through each one of them is when we talk about what is wisdom. So the first one, pro-social attitudes and behaviors.
Yeah. Humans are meant to be social animals. The word Homo sapiens for human species literally means a wise man. And wisdom is a personality trait with different components. And the most important component is pro-social behaviors. That include things like empathy, compassion, altruism. Empathy means sharing and understanding somebody else's emotions and thoughts. Mm-hmm. So if I see somebody who is sad, I can appreciate that person is sad, and I also feel a little sad. That is empathy. Compassion is acting on the empathy and helping the other person. And altruism goes even beyond that, where you help other people without expecting anything in return. One thing to add, though, there is that compassion is not just compassion toward other people. It also includes compassion toward yourself.
Mm-hmm. By the way, as we tick through these things, one thing I noticed is that IQ is not necessarily on the list. So as we tick through this, maybe we should also start asking what is the relationship between being a very smart person and wisdom?
The relationship between IQ and wisdom is not at all linear. Clearly, you need some basic intelligence to have the traits of wisdom. But beyond that, the smartest people or the people with the highest IQ are not the wisest people. They're often unwise because they may not have the pro-social behaviors. They may be very selfish. Actually, some of the mass murderers or even terrorists, they don't lack IQ. They lack wisdom. They lack compassion. They're antisocial. So, and there are also very smart people who are depressed, sad, they commit suicide. That's not happiness. That's not wisdom. So, although some basic intelligence is necessary for wisdom, the two do not go hand in hand.
I like that, because in our leaders, I presume you would say we're looking for wise leaders, not just necessarily smart leaders. And sometimes the so-called smartest people are not the best to lead us.
That's exactly right. I think the smartest people mean that they are good at doing some things that are valued in their specific professions. A smart lawyer, smart physician, but they're not necessarily smart leaders in terms of helping other people. A leader's job is to help everybody else. And only smart people cannot do that unless they have pro-social behavior as well as other components of wisdom.
Okay, next one, emotional stability and happiness.
Yeah. So think about a teenager. His emotions fluctuate hour to hour, minute to minute. And then think about a wiser older person who is calm, regulated, doesn't get flustered too easily, doesn't become ecstatic at one moment and very depressed at the next moment. They can handle panic, they can handle a crisis well. So control over emotion is actually a critical part of wisdom, because if you don't have that control, you're not able to make rational decisions, and that will affect how you behave with other people.
And is it fair to say, broadly speaking, the longer you have lived, the easier it is to become wise?
Usually, with aging, we get more experience. And if we use experience correctly, we become wiser. That doesn't mean that every old person is wise. No, there are some very unwise old people, and there are wise young people also. But by and large, we get more experience with age. There is no question about that. And that experience actually helps us regulate our emotions more. It helps us more compassionate. And these other qualities also improve. So it definitely helps increase wisdom. But it depends on how we use that experience. It is like when there's a crisis or disaster, many people develop post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, right? Some people, they grow from it. That is called post-traumatic growth. So same crisis will have different effect on different people. And the wise people use it wisely.
Broadly speaking, would you say wise people have less stress? They're able to manage their stress?
Wise people don't necessarily have less stress. Everybody has stress, but they manage the stress better. They don't get panicky. They think about themselves, sort of what is happening. They think about others, how to overcome the stress. And they realize that they have gone through stresses in the past. They survived, and they will do the same thing. They know how to use the support system. And so all of these things actually lead to better coping with stress, which wise people do better than people who are not wise.
Okay, next one, balancing decisiveness with acceptance of uncertainty.
Yeah. Acceptance of uncertainty is an important part of wisdom. Socrates said that anybody who thinks he is wise is not a wise person. Because if you are wise, you know how much you don't know. There is so much there out there. And we really know very small part of that. Equally important is acceptance of diverse perspectives. So I may have strong values about something, and I will always keep them. But I can understand why somebody else may have different value system. I don't have to agree with that person, but we can still be friends, or at least we can interact with one another. And in the modern world, what is happening is there is so much polarization that people don't communicate with one another if their views vary. And this is not just in politics. I mean, even in science and law and schools and so on, we see that inability to accept the fact that different people can have different views, and it is okay. Again, that doesn't mean we have to agree with them.
And by the way, where did this list come from? Ultimately, how did you come to this conclusion that these are the things that make up wisdom?
Sure. The wisdom is an ancient concept. It is there in all the religions and all the philosophies. For example, the Bible has, I think, 12 books on wisdom, like Solomon's book, Book of Job, and so on and so forth. So we actually started by looking at some of the scriptures and to find out what are the components of wisdom in those. But then, of course, one could argue that that's an old concept. It doesn't apply to today's world. So then we looked at the literature today. Okay, scientific research on wisdom started in the 1970s. It started at the Max Planck Institute in Berlin and at University of Southern California, USC, and Los Angeles. Since then, it has been growing. And so there are now more and more studies coming out on wisdom. So what we did was we reviewed the literature, modern Western literature, to find out what are the common elements of wisdom according to these people. So we had two sets of components. One was from the scriptures, second was the modern Western literature. And we thought these two would be very different. We were shocked to find they were nearly identical. They had the same things like emotional regulation, empathy, compassion, being kind to others. One other thing I will talk about is self reflection, which is a component of wisdom. Another is spirituality. That's also a component of wisdom. So these are things that were there in the scripture, that are there in our world today, that at least the wisdom researchers. It means that wisdom is a biologically based trait. And so that is how we came up with our definition, looking at the common elements in the published literature, starting with the scriptures and then going to the modern Western literature. So it is not definition that I made up or anything like that, but looking at really the broad consensus on that issue.
Okay, next one, reflection and self-understanding.
Yeah. Self-reflection is really also a critical part of wisdom, because often what happens is when something goes wrong, I do something, immediately I tend to blame somebody else. It's not my fault, somebody else did that. That doesn't help. So a wise person spends some time self-reflecting. Why did this happen? Did I do something wrong that I could do better next time? So you learn about yourself and you learn from others. So that self-reflection is critical. And unfortunately, that is often lacking in the world today. Immediate tendency is to blame something or somebody, and rather than thinking that I may have done something wrong.
Yeah, I remember there was a study about, they were referring to smart people, but it could just as well apply to wise, or maybe even more importantly, apply to wise, where smarter people always underestimated how well they did on a test, whereas less smart people always overestimated how well they did on a test. So an element of wisdom is being able to understand how wise or unwise you are.
That's exactly right. I think, yeah, that applies to wisdom rather than IQ. Because if you are wise, you know how much you don't know. That's one thing. Secondly, you also have gone through both good and bad experiences. So when you have good experience, you don't get carried away. Likewise, when there's a bad experience, you don't get totally down on yourself. So you keep this middle ground where you think about both positive and negative things at any point. And that really is self-reflection, emotional regulation, but also with positivity. That's something worth to be stressed. That when we are young, when anything goes wrong, it sticks with us forever. So they say young minds are like Velcro to negative experiences. Older minds are like Teflon to negative experiences. So, for example, sometime back, I was going to a meeting, the flight got delayed, my bags didn't arrive, and I panicked. What do I do? Something happened 15 years later, and when that happened, I was pretty calm, and I said, okay, my clothes didn't arrive, so I'm in jeans and sneakers. And everybody laughed, and fine. So negative experiences in older age have less influence. You remember the positive things. Life is short. You don't want to waste it on negative things, thinking about them all the time. And there's actually a biological basis why this happens. Maybe we can talk about that a little later. But these changes that I'm describing with age, they're partly biology-based.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's basically part of maturing, I would think, would be kind of this element of wisdom. I know that I've read that children see everything egocentrically. Anything that happens around and they assume it was something that they did or something that happened because this person is thinking of them in a certain way. And then as you mature, you begin to realize, oh, it's not all about me.
Oh, that's exactly right. When we are young, we think the sun and the moon, they actually roll around us. We are the center of the universe. And slowly we realize that that's not the case at all. And yet, that doesn't make us feel too depressed later on in life. Later we accept the fact, but we say that it's true, but that applies to everybody else also. And still, we think about how lucky we are, that we have family, we have friends, we have done things. So, although we no longer think that the world revolves around us, that doesn't depress us the way it did when we were in our 20s and early 30s.
Mm-hmm. Just to say in childhood for a second, how do you feel about childhood traumas We've talked a lot about that on this show, and the impact that that has on a child's brain, and then the ability for the child to overcome that later in life in order to achieve wisdom.
Childhood trauma is clearly something very serious. And of course, it depends on the type of trauma, whether it is physical, mental, cognitive, whatever it is. Childhood trauma is terrible. I mean, it's really because we're affecting brains where they're in the developing stages. It's very sad. On the other hand, the kids do recover. Again, it varies a lot depending on trauma. It depends on the environment, depends on the parents, family, the rest of the community, how you can help them. I mean, we all have seen kids who had severe childhood abuse. And yet, when they grew up, they actually became very successful researchers, sociologists, psychologists, whatever. And they can do that, but they need help. They need support. Support is critical. And if we provide that support, the kids, the worst possible trauma, can recover and do much better than they otherwise would.
And do they need to recover from those traumas in order to ultimately achieve wisdom?
They need to recover to a large extent. They don't have to forget the trauma. They cannot forget the trauma often. And total forgetting is not possible. However, they really need to get over it. Because if they persisted with that, that's going to be tough to recover from it. So you accept the fact that you had trauma because there's nothing you can do to that. Something happened. The wise person always thinks about where you go from here, what is under your control, how you move on. So you keep it under check and move on to other things.
I mean, one thing I've observed is that as terrible as childhood trauma is, that if you look at some of the great minds out there, especially in the arts, musicians, etc., painters, and so on. I mean, almost all of the exceptional people had some type of trauma early on that they had to overcome or deal with, and they're still suffering from it to this day, but they're very successful in this particular field.
You're exactly right. I think there are great examples of people who really suffered when they were growing up, and yet managed to recover, managed to overcome. And beyond overcoming it, you see sometimes people making that a mission of their life. For example, somebody who was alcoholic for a number of years recovers from, and then that person becomes a crusader for preventing alcoholism in, say, teenagers. And there are people who actually take that as a role for avoiding and preventing the damage that they have, which is a great way of overcoming those stresses.
Right. But there's many that become very successful, but they never truly overcome it. I mean, let's just take an example, somebody like Elton John. If you know Elton John's story, I mean, this guy's kind of the Mozart of our times, but he has struggled his whole life with addictions and with, managing his own emotions and so on. And to this day is certainly imperfect and probably not the wisest of people out there, but achieved this incredible success in large part stemming from this childhood neglect and so forth that he suffered.
That is true. So the question is, thinking broadly, what is the purpose of life for each person? The purpose of life is to live happily, have higher well-being. And the success that the society measures is important, but it may not be that important to the person. So let us see if I'm very highly successful in, say, sports, I get all the championships, but I'm very sad, I'm depressed, and I commit suicide. That's really not a happy life. That's not wisdom. So happy life is where I may not get all the championships, I would lose some, and that's okay, but I'm happy.
A wise person would inherently be happy, right?
Yeah, there should be well-being. Yes, contentedness is essential. Not happiness to an extreme where you are ecstatic and so on. That's not necessary. But that's actually not even appropriate. But contentedness is important for wisdom.
Going back to my UC Irvine days, I remember a philosophy class I took there where it was always like, why do you want this? And then you continue to ask that question. Okay, why do you want a new car? Oh, well, I want to drive a new car because, I want to look cool. Okay, why do you want to look cool? I want to look cool so I get acceptance from my friends. Why do you want acceptance from your friends? And ultimately, if you keep asking those questions, the ultimate end answer is for happiness. That the ultimate end of life is happiness, personal happiness. Is that correct?
That's exactly right.
You
And
can't ask sorry, I guess the last question, because you can't ask somebody, well, why do you want to be happy? Happy is right. That's the ultimate ends, is to be happy. You can't ask somebody, why do you want to be happy? I want to be happy because I want to be happy.
exactly, exactly. And I think every person deserves to be happy. And so and our goal is to make other people happy. So I'm a physician. And so what is the goal of medical care, right? And so often the medicine used to focus, and still it does, on reducing symptoms. So I'm a psychiatrist. So if I treat somebody with depression, schizophrenia, I want those symptoms to come down. Heart surgeon would have, different things, but still, increasingly people have come to conclusion that what the physician should do is to improve the well-being of their patient. And so the ultimate outcome is well-being. Even in research at NIH, for example, often the ultimate goal is to improve well-being. Because if we reduce somebody's symptoms, let's say if we reduce somebody's blood pressure, high blood pressure, great. But if that person continues to be unhappy, we have not really succeeded. Yeah. So happiness, contentedness, and well-being are really, as you said, ultimate goal.
And we have a society in America, but probably most of the world, where the focus is on monetary things, money things, our GDP. We want our president and our Congress to maximize our GDP, and all this obsession about disparities in wealth inequality, and who has more, and billionaires and people not having enough money. But you never hear America being measured by happiness.
No, that's exactly right. There have been actually some studies of what is called happiness index. And in France, actually, they had a minister for happiness. And so they developed this happiness index and they measured it in different countries. Again, one can question its reliability, validity, but whatever it is. The US was somewhere in the middle. Not at the top, not at all. And it was lower than number of poor countries. Because just like you said, our tendency is to equate happiness with income. And that's not right. People in poor countries are happier because they accept what they have. I think unhappiness comes because our expectations exceed what we have. And so if we adjust our expectations, so what we can do, we'll be happy. And that doesn't mean lowering the expectations. No. I mean, there are people, even with disability, they can do a lot and they do a lot, but they cannot have unwieldy expectations. For example, let's say I have some weakness in my legs. I can never play NFL, right? But why do I have to play in NFL? I can still do something, I can run or whatever, right? So that's the thing, that if we adjust the expectations to the best we can, we'll be happy.
Appreciating what you have, right? One of the main keys to happiness. I used to complain that I had no shoes until I saw a man with no feet.
Beautifully said. Exactly.
And in America, it's arguably harder because we're constantly barraged or seeing our neighbors having something that we don't have. And, it's hard to be content with what you have.
And that is one of the very few differences in the concept of wisdom from scriptures to world today. The scriptures don't talk about materialism. They don't talk about how much wealth you have. And some cultures, actually, you are frowned upon if you spend too much time on material goods. But the modern world, the materialism becomes so important, the wealth becomes so important that we think people who are not wealthy must be unhappy. That's not right.
Yeah. I mean, just to stay on that for a second, there was a, forget who it was, but someone in the new administration that was talking about how we want parents in the workforce. in particular mothers in the workforce. And it's just like, again, why this objective that we want parents in the workforce? To what end? What, so that our America's GDP can get higher? I mean, is that how you achieve true happiness, is to make sure that parents are working? What is the connection? I mean, that makes a particular parent happy. Okay. But what is the connection between wanting parents in the workforce and happiness?
That's where this acceptance of diverse perspectives comes into play. That different people have different perspectives, and they should continue pursuing what their perspective is. And we shouldn't force it on others that everybody must do the same.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, government just too often overreaches in all parts of the world as far as deciding this is what people should want and then pushing in that direction. My favorite thing to complain about is Bloomberg in New York, who wanted to ban 16-ounce sodas because it has too much sugar. I'm like, individual freedom and decision making and so on is very key to ultimately obtaining happiness. I mean, to have things dictated to you as opposed to you making the decisions on your own. It seems to me, if I try to draw a comparison to wisdom, that you're going to stifle people's development to wisdom if you have some overarching government telling people what they can and can't do.
I think probably one can give an example of parent. So if a parent has 3 children, and the 3 children are not going to be identical. They have different personalities, they have different interests, and they should pursue their interests, which would be different. So one may want to go into medicine, one may want to be artist, and one may want to do social work or go into politics, whatever it is. I think it would be wrong to expect that all of them must do something, same thing that the parents did. So I agree that accepting different perspectives, and so the parents' goal would be to help them achieve their goals, what they want to do.
Yeah, well, let's stay in children for a second. That story struck a nerve with me, by the way, because my father always said I was going to be a lawyer, and I'm talking about 8 years old, and my brother was going to be a doctor. So, nice aspirations for a parent. If you ask my dad today about it, he'll say, well, what's wrong with, implanting something in the kid's head, But from the age of 8, I was obsessed with radio. I was announcing my Little League games from the shortstop position. I mean, it was just in my nature. I was just obsessed with everything about broadcasting. Whoops. Can't keep my microphone straight. Maybe I shouldn't be in broadcasting. Anyway, but he sent me on the direction of being a lawyer. Now, I'll never say that I regretted becoming a lawyer, but I do have to acknowledge that had I gone down that other path from the beginning instead of now doing it at the end, because I've done a number of different shows throughout my career, but I was a lawyer, and then I ran a company, and then we sold the company, and then I started this, and so I'm arguably now finally doing my true passion. But if Dad had just kept me on that course, or so, what is your advice to parents in that regard as they're raising their kids and sending them on a path?
Our ultimate goal would be to make the kids happy, obviously. I mean, at the same time, they have to survive and thrive in the world, which is competitive. And so it's a balance that is what is needed. On the one hand, so they need to study hard, but again, if they are capable of that. So if I have a child who is disabled, has autism, let us say, or intellectual disability disorder, then my expectations of that child would be very different from a child who is super smart, right? So I need to find out what that child can do at their best. How do I help the child grow to be the best he can be? And that's not in my sort of with my vision in mind, but what the child would want to be. But how do I help that? And so not imposing my values, and also taking into account the child's strengths and limitations. Equally important, aptitudes. That's important. I mean, obviously, if my child if the child wants to be an alcoholic or something, that's not good. And so that's something I would not encourage. I mean, I would prevent that to the extent that I can. But just like you said, if the child is say, not meant to be a musician and I am a musician, that's totally wrong to force music on the child. On the other hand, I'm not a musician, the child is a musician, so very interested in music, then I would enroll them in some music classes and help them with, although I don't learn anything about music, it's good for them because they like it and they can. So the parents' job is to help each child grow into the best they can be, which will make them happy.
It takes a wise person to raise a wise child, it sounds like.
Yes, I mean, it's also a matter of luck. So I'm lucky in the sense that my wife is a child psychiatrist. We have two daughters, and both of them are physicians. And we never told them to be physicians at all. It's something they chose to do. And the point is that I often consider myself lucky because things would have gone wrong. I mean, what if the child had been born with cerebral palsy or something like that? I would have had no control. Or if something happened to the child afterwards, again, I would have had no control. So definitely I count my blessings all the time. But beyond that, I feel good that I've been a good parent. Because my wife is a very good parent. And the way I know that is I'm not bragging about myself. My daughters tell me that then I'm a workaholic, I work all the time. But they said they know that if they needed me, I would always be available. And that's the best compliment I can ever get from anybody. And so this is not because I spend a lot of time with them. No, actually I didn't in the sense. But I spent quality time. And they saw me being happy. I think that was important.
So how would you describe the role of nature versus nurture in creating a wise person?
So wisdom, as I said, is a personality trait. And most personality traits are about 50% inherited. That means 50% of them are determined by environment and behavior. But this is a general percentage that vary. IQ, for example, you can't really change it much.
Wisdom. IQ is nature.
IQ is nature. That's correct. I mean, you can make small difference by improving the environment, but not a huge difference. Wisdom, you can. And that's the nice thing about wisdom. You can improve somebody's empathy, compassion, self-reflection, emotional regulation, spirituality, accepting diversity. So you can improve that. And that's why I think it is something that the society needs to do. I mean, just as you said so correctly, we are so focused on these materialistic things. And in the process, what is happening, the societal wisdom is going down. I believe that talking about the pandemic of loneliness, suicides, opioid use, it is real. And it has been going on for the last 2 decades, if not longer.
Oh, yeah. Mental health in America is probably at, I don't know about an all-time low, but certainly is a low in our lifetimes, right?
It is. I mean, CDC data show that the rates of suicide in the US have increased 33% in the last 20 years. Clear data. And
sorry, go ahead.
And the deaths from opioid use have increased 6-fold from 1999 to today. So obviously there's something wrong.
Yeah, shootings are up, suicides are up, depression is up, drug abuse is up. Am I wrong to attribute that to the breakdown of the family? It seems to me, if you look at statistics on the family and the number of children raised in a single parent home, et cetera, has gone up dramatically kind of in advance of that same period. So that's what I point to. What do you think?
So I think what you said is very correct, and that has been going on obviously for some time. But I think what happened in the last 20 to 30 years is two things: globalization and very rapid rise in technology. And so both have been good in some ways. Obviously, globalization brings the whole world together, small world, we can go anywhere, and etc. Technology is great. I mean, without technology, we wouldn't be having this kind of a meeting. It helps poor people In India, when I was growing up, we had to wait for 20 years before we could have a phone at home. And you have to be super rich. Now, even a person in a ghetto has a smartphone. So globalization and technology have helped, but also they have hurt in major ways. So because of globalization, the competition has increased tremendously. So now I'm competing not only with people in San Diego or California or US, I'm competing with people from all over the world. So how to get a job, how to keep a job. Also, the pressure is greater. If I just stay in San Diego all the time, people will say, what is wrong with you? How come you're not doing other things, right? Also, globalization has increased our stress because constantly we are getting bad news from some part of the world. So if there is something, if I only got San Diego news, let us say, the good things happen here, bad things happen here. But when you look at the world, the only news that makes headlines is earthquake in Japan or tsunami in Bangladesh or terrorist attack in Italy, so on and so forth. So you really start feeling down because that's all you get. So that's globalization. When you come to technology, it is advancing so fast. I really think that human brain probably might not have been meant to tackle these changes at that level. I mean, I was so happy when I switched from iPhone 6 to iPhone 10. I said, that's great. And before I knew, there was already iPhone 12X out there. There is information overload and expectation that I would need to know everything that's going on. How come you didn't know? Didn't you read that, etc.? Social media. Social media have had such a negative influence on many younger people. And we have read about the suicides committed by people because of social media, tweets or whatever. And especially the younger people are suffering more from it. So I think that what is happening with globalization and very rapid rise of technology is that, so they're making what you are saying even worse. So families are breaking up, increase divorce rates, and people are moving. There's lack of social connectedness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the lack of family kind of plays right into that, right? The social connectedness. If you don't have the connectedness of a family, and a strong family can overcome some of the things that you're talking about. But when you then don't have those roots and you throw in the technology and the globalization, that's really a recipe.
No, that's very true. Actually, the studies in the last 30 years have shown what is called social determinants of health. Loneliness, social isolation, social support, social engagement. And that, of course, includes family support and family engagement. I mean, that's the closest society we have, right? They have greater effect on our health and lifespan than smoking, obesity, physical activity, alcoholism. And yet we don't pay attention to them. So and one of the best protective factors against loneliness is being married or having a partner and having a happy relationship with that person. Studies, actually, religiosity has also been found to be associated with better health and greater longevity. Education is, of course, important. But of these things, I mean, there are things that we have control over. And that includes, again, family and society.
So the last item on what makes a wise person or what is wisdom is social decision-making and pragmatic knowledge of life.
So wise person is not necessarily, as I said, the smartest person, the most highly educated. No. I mean, it can be a grandma in a small village. She is actually the wisest person. And then everybody goes to her when they have some difficulty because she has the knowledge of life. She has been through that. She has knowledge of the totally family, community. She knows the differences and she knows what will work for whom, which younger people may not, or the smartest people may not, because she's not too selfish. She's not self-centered. So she actually has a better objective perspective. And she wants to help others. And she has no selfish needs because she has lived her life. So that kind of social decision-making becomes important. it is the village elder, or we talk about elderly statesman, because these are people who can give conflict-free advice. Most of the younger people, they would have to think about what helps them, they would suggest to others. And
Go ahead.
So this kind of, so that is a social decision making, which is helpful for others. That's the point.
So I found your 6-question test. I think this is your test for evaluating.
Actually, it's a 28 item scale. And what happened was this Daily Mail in London. In the story, they actually published the 6 items. So 6 items became famous, but still, it is fine. And
so it's worth ticking through these 6 items. I'm going to take the test right now, and you can kind of walk us through why these are important. But they relate to all the things you just said. I think I enjoy being exposed to diverse viewpoints. So I gave myself a 4 out of 5. I think that I certainly enjoy hearing different viewpoints, although sometimes it is more enjoyable to converse with people that share your view. It's a little uncomfortable and a little harder to have the other conversations. So as far as enjoy, I'm open to them, but to be honest, I probably enjoy those conversations less.
I think that's actually a very good score. I mean, the idea that one should get a 5 on everything is not correct, because so you need a balance. For example, let's say I truly enjoyed all diverse perspectives. I'll be getting different perspectives from everybody. I will have a problem. The problem is I will never be able to make a decision because I don't know which is right and which is wrong. Right? I mean, I hear from all perspectives and I think they are all right. How can I be decisive? So there needs to be some limit to that. But you, as a talk show host, I mean, obviously you listen to diverse perspectives, and so your rating is very appropriate.
Interesting. So that's kind of a trick question. I assumed that the best answer was to be a 5 on enjoying being exposed to diverse viewpoints, but you're saying not necessarily.
I mean, one thing is there is no ideal score or perfect score. It depends on the environment and personality, age, and so on and so forth. But score below 3 is not good.
Okay, the next one is I have a difficult time keeping friendships. I don't feel that I have a difficult time with that, but explain to us why that's a relevant question for wisdom.
Because if I have difficulty keeping friendship, that means I probably don't have enough compassion or empathy. That also means that I don't actually have ability to understand others' emotions or thinking, and that's why they avoid me. I don't have good social skills. But you don't need to have 100 friends. You don't even need to have 10 friends. If you had 2 or 3 who are close to you, people you trust, people you respect, you are fine. I mean, older people, sometimes they live with their spouse or partner, and that's the only contact they have. But if they have a good relationship, they don't need anything else. But if you don't have that, then it really creates problem, because social support, including this friendship, is one of the best predictors of happier and longer life.
Here was a really interesting one, I thought. I tend to postpone making major decisions as long as I can. I definitely have a tough time making that final decision, when okay, there's no going back. Once you decide this, that's the direction you're going, and tend to hesitate pulling the trigger at that. So where should you be coming down if you're a wise person on postponing major decisions as long as you can?
So what it means is that so we are not talking about minor decisions, of course, so major decisions. So major decisions should not be made impulsively and immediately. So somebody who makes the decision quite very quickly, if you get a major email and you respond to it right away, that's not wise. But you can't sit on it forever. Because so if I have to make a major decision, say whether to buy this house or that house, or even more major, of course, would be choosing a job, let us say, or and when you're younger, choosing your life partner. So clearly you need to think pros, cons, what will happen, you need to talk to people to get their feedback. So there is self-reflection as well as comment from other sort of diverse perspectives. But if you sit on it for a long time, then that indecisiveness hurts you. Because I think one reason why we postpone the decisions is because we are worried about the long-term consequences. And this is something you may be interested in knowing. What is good is bad, is good is bad, is good is bad. So there's the story, I think, in the scriptures of village in which there was a small family and they had a cow, and the cow was important for agriculture. And then the cow died. So, gosh, I mean, it's a terrible thing for the family. But then the rest of the villagers got together and they said they bought 2 cows and gave those to this family. So that actually turned out to be good news. Then the son was trying to domesticate the cow, etc. In the process, he broke his leg. So that became bad news. But then there was a draft, and he was not drafted because he had a broken leg. So that's good news. So point here is what is good news is bad news, is good news is bad news. So if we are postponing the decisions so that it will all turn out to be, we don't know what will happen. So the goal is to make the best decisions at this moment based on what you have. And then don't sort of rethink about that. Don't blame yourself if it goes wrong. That's okay. Even if it goes wrong in the short run, it will go right again in the future.
Yeah, that's great. No, that's something that I've kind of accepted in the past number of years is, trying not to regret the past, because it's the same thing kind of with decision making. The reason you hesitate on the decision is you don't want to regret your decision. But ultimately, if you don't worry about regret, then to your point, you become less concerned about that decision.
Exactly right. That's exactly right.
And what the thing that helped me mentally is like, well, I can regret a decision, but I don't know truly what would have happened had I done that. So my favorite thing to me is just, actually, this is less about decisions and just more about accepting circumstances. If I'm stuck in traffic, that used to aggravate the hell out of me, that I'm stuck in this traffic, But then when you start realizing, well, if I didn't get stopped behind this accident, who knows what would have happened? I could have been in an accident down the road. I mean, you just don't know. If that fork in the road goes that way, you have no idea what that would have resulted in. So we accept the fork in the road that you did take, and you can't look back.
You really hit the nail on its head. That's exactly the point. And that often happens in sports. The coach makes a decision, brings in the relief pitcher, and the hitter hits a home run. And he said, coach was so dumb. Why did he make that decision? Well, how did he know that? And if he had brought somebody else, he would have hit a home run too. So but it's exactly what you're saying. This kind of regret, Monday morning quarterbacking.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Yeah. Even I've been using that. I like to bet on sports. So for me, it really hits home. But, my team goes up and misses a layup. Easy layup, and he misses the layup, and I'm going crazy. But then if you really realize, well, hold on a second, the fact that he missed that layup means that the other team, the ball got in the hands of so-and-so and then went to so-and-so and so-and-so. Had he made the layup, everything from that point in the game would have changed. So you don't know if missing that layup will turn out to be a good thing or a bad thing.
That's exactly right. Right. And that's where difference in age comes into play. Younger people, they are so regretful for everything they did. And that's why their stress increases. Whereas in older people, regret goes down. And even biological studies have shown that, even with the brain imaging, that regret goes down with aging.
So can you look at a brain and determine how wise this person is?
Unfortunately not, because the neuroscience has not advanced that much. Right now, the way we look at the brain using MRI or even post-quantum brain, no, we can make out things if they're obviously abnormal. Somebody has dementia, Alzheimer's disease, or stroke, or cancer of the brain. You can detect that, but no. Wisdom, you can do some subtle studies, what is called functional brain imaging. And we have published some papers like that. So what you do is inject a dye, for example, and then see how it goes through your different areas of the brain. And you give them a task. You show them a happy face, sad face, or you ask them to solve a problem. And while they're doing that, you look at their brain in this way. You see difference between people who are wiser versus old, not wise.
Mm-hmm. And how do you feel about psychedelic drugs? Have you thought about that or investigated that as it pertains to people? You know, the whole thing, we only use 5 or 10% of our brain and tapping into things. And, you know, ayahuasca, for instance, has been known for people tapping into something. And I think the word could be wiser, becoming wiser about themselves or understanding something about themselves that perhaps they couldn't have done otherwise.
Well, that is not my area of research, so I really cannot speak with knowledge about that. But I know in medicine, this is a controversial topic right now. Things like psilocybin, for example, you know, what LSD was a long time back. But many people thought actually that LSD, they say, clears the windows of perception. And so all of these drugs have some unusual impact on the brain. There's no question about that. But they also have a negative impact. And it's a question of balancing between the positive and negative impact. And that varies by people. So in some people, the positive impact could last for a long time. In some people, the negative impact could be a major problem. So I think the problem becomes in generalizing, saying that this thing, that LSD works for people or does not work for people. And so I think one has to be careful. That's what I would say in using this drug. Again, we need more research.
What on a related subject that takes it out of the drug thing is like meditation. You know, again, things that allow you to tap into elements of your brain. Is meditation something that you consider to be very important?
Yeah, you know, meditation, actually, there have been a number of studies that have been published in major journals and grants by NIH and so on that show that meditation, clearly not just doing once, but if you do it over a period of time, it improves brain functioning. So studies have shown, for example, on functional MRI, that the functioning increases. Some of the connections in the brain, they get better. The white matter integrity improves. So meditation should not have downsides, unlike the psychedelics. So at the worst, it will not do any good. Mm-hmm. But so that's why, I mean, I would say that for people who find it useful, there's no harm in doing it. There could be benefit doing it.
Okay, as we look out there in the world today, who are the wise people? Who's on your list?
Then I don't want to talk about living people because that becomes always controversial. But this is a question actually people ask, sort of name the wisest people in the world. And then the common candidates are Mother Teresa, Martin Luther King, Abraham Lincoln.
But you know, let me just interrupt you on a few of those, because happiness is such an important element. Personal happiness is such an important element of a wise person, right? As we talked about. Do we know how genuinely happy Abraham Lincoln was, or Mother Teresa, or who was the other one you mentioned?
Martin Luther King.
Martin Luther King.
Now, you know, again, what I was describing to you is the popular notion about the wise people. So your point is very well taken. So, and thank you for asking me that. My feeling is that often the wisest people are the ones most of us don't know, because they are actually, as I said, the grandma in the family, in a village in Deep South, may be the wisest person in that community. And yet, we don't know that. You know, this is, people talk about Wizard of Oz and so, but those are actually different kind of symbols. We all know people in our families or in our social circle who are wise, right? We go to them, we ask them questions, or we ask different questions to different people. But these are the wisest people, and we know how they are, right? I mean, typically, taking the grandma's example, she'll be pretty contented. She's not complaining about things all the time. And then, you know, occasionally she may complain, but she's fine otherwise. She accepts the fact that she has some physical illnesses. She can't hear, but she gets over those. And she genuinely cares for the family. The family cares for her. When you go to her, you know that she will give advice that is good for that person and for others. Those are the wisest people. Not necessarily these famous people, only because we know them.
Right. Yeah. I mean, somebody like, Martin Luther King, that is a type of person that comes to mind when you think about a wise person. But then when you also think about what he was able to do with his life, I mean, how he put himself out there and, basically ultimately, sacrificed himself essentially because he almost knew he was going to be killed at some point. But in order to be a person with that type of fortitude to go out there almost tells me that, going back to childhood traumas or something, that something's wrong with that person. It ends up being to our benefit, Elton John, etc. But you really wonder, I know that, he was known to have marital affairs and this and that, but, you really wonder someone like that who on the surface is very wise, whether they were truly happy.
Right. I think what happens is that people often consider compassion and sort of what you do for the society as the indicator of wisdom. And I think that's useful for the society, but that may not be useful for the person himself or herself. So if they were to take our San Diego wisdom scale, they may not score that high on the wisdom scale. So your point is very well taken. Actually, I'm glad you mentioned that because this has not been brought up in my conversations previously. It's a great point. I think it is because society, I think we think about, obviously these are famous people, Mother Teresa. Exactly. I don't know how happy she was. Unlikely she was happy most of the time because otherwise she wouldn't have gone out and done something. She probably felt that she needed to do more. And that's great for the other people. Whether it was great for her, I don't know.
Yeah, it could have been for her overcoming, in order, sounds really silly, but anyway, in order to feel good about yourself. Some people will do things that appear altruistic, but they're doing it just because they're trying to overcome some feeling in themselves that they feel inadequate. And the way they make themselves feel good is doing something for another person, but they're not really tending to what they need internally.
Right. I think it is easier to define non-wise persons than to define wise or to exemplify. So people who are not wise, we all agree, the terrorists and the mass murderers, the gang members and other people who hurt their family and themselves and their society. They're clearly, they are not wise people. But who are the wisest? Great question.
Yeah. Well,
and also I do think we become wiser with age most of the time, not all do. So the same person could be unwise when he or she was young. So some of these examples that you gave actually, who suffered from trauma and that made them feel very depressed and, they even acted out and run into trouble with the law when they were teenagers. Later on, they turned out to be very pro-social, etc. So they would have been totally unwise when they were younger, but they became wiser later.
Let's wrap up with two things. One is we touched on it a little bit, but just to put a fine point on it. So I'm having my first child. So what's your advice to me to put my child in the best position to achieve wisdom?
The best thing is actually enjoy time with the child. And that I do think that effect comes through to the child. I think no reason to reduce your work or other things. Because you need to be happy. If you are happy, you'll make the child happy. And the quality time is that what matters. And try to understand the child. Again, when the child grows up, he or she will have their own personality. And some of that personality is predetermined. Kids are like that. You can see at the age of 1, some of them are more feisty, aggressive. Some of them are more quiet, etc. And whosoever they, that's whatever they are. Let them grow up with a lot of love from the parents. I think there is no question about that. Unless they do something wrong. Then one has to be strict and you have to prohibit things that would hurt others because that's not good in the child's interest. So they have to be compassionate and self-reflecting, emotionally regulated, but not have too high expectations. And then, but keeping love, as I said again and again, that's critical. And let them be themselves so long as they don't run into trouble, and then encourage them to develop that. kids change. Actually, so we have two daughters, and our older daughter, they were quite different when they were young. Our older one was very sociable, much more so than my wife or I. And she would, when she was in kindergarten, she would introduce us to her friends' parents. The younger daughter was very shy, very shy. I mean, she would just talk like that. As they grew up, they become more similar than different.
Mm.
So both of them are physicians now. Both of them are doing very well. And they are, I mean, of course, the older one still is more social than the younger one, but still, we are very proud of them, equally proud of them too. So don't get too worried if they are different, in the sense if they are too shy, for example, it's okay. So that's the thing that will come down, of course, be whatever they are, and then help them grow. I'm sure you'll be a great parent. I mean, I really, no doubt.
Thank you. Well, a rule of thumb that I like to say, having never been a parent, but just thinking about it, is that you can never give a child too much love or too much discipline. And when I say discipline, I don't mean, with the ruler kind of thing, but having them deal with their emotions when they don't get what they want. That's the discipline of control yourself. You don't get the toy, but learning to deal with things that don't go well that's a discipline that to regulate your emotions, right?
Right. Absolutely. Discipline is critical. I mean, there is no question about that. But it's a balance between the two. And, like in Freud's terminology, the superego, ego, and id. So you have to discipline, but even when you're disciplining them, they still know that you love them. And you're disciplining them because you want them to be better. You're not disciplining them because you want to punish them because you don't like them. That's not the reason. So that comes through, I think.
I like that you want them to be better. Okay. And then I can't finish without asking you about aging, because I know that's one of your expertises. So advice for people who want to age well. What's the most important thing? I mean, for me personally, I don't understand the idea of somebody says, "Oh, I don't want to live till I'm 80 or till I'm 90 or till I'm 100." But I'm like, well, the alternative is being dead. So I like the idea of living as long as possible, but obviously you want to have your faculties. So what's your advice to put people in the best position to live a long life, but a happy life?
Sure. So healthy lifestyle is obviously critical. Keep yourself active physically, active mentally, and active socially. All these three are equally important things, really critical. Other commonly does good nutrition. You don't want to have high fat, high sugar foods, so calorie intake that is appropriate. Sleeping well is important. It's often hard, but try to do that. And of course, whatever illnesses you have, take the treatment and follow that regularly. Don't ignore your health, in the sense if something needed, make sure you take it. But that is all. So these are the commonly advocated. I think equally important are the psychosocial strategies. It's critical to have resilience, optimism, compassion, self-compassion. These different types, the qualities of wisdom that I described. They really are important. And not because it is sort of feel-good TV science. Studies have shown that, for example, optimism. Studies have shown that optimistic people live on an average 8 years longer than pessimistic people. And this is after controlling for other things, right?
8 years.
8 years.
Wow.
And again, I mean, it will vary from study to study and population, but resilience, same thing. Social engagement and social support are so critical. And social support, as I said, doesn't mean you have to have 100 friends. No, you need to have few friends whom you trust and respect, and where there's mutual trust and respect. That is so critical. Crisis will come no matter what. You need to have somebody you can talk to, feel confident about, that they will give you the right advice, just as we do with the parents do to the children. Even when you disagree, there's no question about the motivation, right? So we need to have that kind of support. If we have those, I think we will do very well. Physical illnesses don't matter that much. This may come as a shock to people. Our studies show that a person with stage 4 cancer, we found was happier than a person who was physically fully healthy. So you can if you have physical illnesses, of course you have to take care of them. But again, all of these qualities, optimism, resilience, in a realistic way, obviously. I can't be so optimistic that I will say, oh, I don't need to take any cancer treatment, I'll be fine. No, that is stupid. So you do those things, but also have social support and social engagement.
Thank you again to Dr. Jeste. You can check out his book, Wiser, The Scientific Roots of Wisdom, Compassion, and What Makes Us Good, at Amazon or some other place that you buy books. Perhaps not Amazon would be better. Thank you to our producer, Michael Parker. Thank you all for listening. We'll be back soon with another episode of The Hidden Truth Show.
Thank you for listening to The Hidden Truth Show with Jim Breslow. You can find us at hiddentruthshow.com. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Hidden Truth Show. Join us again next week for another episode of Hidden Truth Show with Jim Breslow.